What's up, everyone, and welcome back to the King's Court. So today I want to talk about everything, well, not everything, but the big thing that came out today with that federal judge in Seattle ruling that the United States had to allow entry to these 12,000 refugees. Now, this is not nearly as evil as I think a lot of people think it looks. I do agree that this is not something that should happen right now, and it's also not going to happen right now. So let me kind of walk through the history of this. Okay, so this is something stemming out of Donald Trump's January 20th executive orders. So I've got a timeline over here. I'm going to kind of read out and kind of talk a little bit about. So on January 20th, 2025, President Donald Trump, during I believe this was one of the orders that he signed after the inauguration in the White House, not one of the ones he signed at the parade. So he signed Order 14163, quote, realigning the United States Refugee Admissions Program. What this did, and this I've got a list of what it did here, indefinitely suspending the USRAP, halting refugee admissions, and cutting funding to resettlement agencies. Okay. About 3 weeks later, a lawsuit entitled Pacito v. Trump was filed in the U.S. District Court for the Western District of Washington. The plaintiffs are 9 refugees who are only going by their first names and 3 faith-based resettlement agencies. They are the Church World Service, Lutheran Community Services Northwest, and HIAS. I don't know anything about these agencies. I would like to believe that a faith-based agency has God and being Christ-like and all those sort of adjectives, whatever, at the forefront of their mission. But I don't know. They challenged the executive order as a violation of the Refugee Act of 1980. And so after this lawsuit was filed, the judge, the one that we've all heard about, Jamal Whitehead, he issued a preliminary injunction. Like I talked about in the video yesterday, preliminary injunctions are usually nationwide injunctions that are supposed to provide time for the case to be held. So he issues this injunction, and one of the bases for this injunction was that he found that that Donald Trump acted outside of his authority to suspend these systems that Congress had set up. So the way that the branches work is Congress passes laws, the executive signs them in, unless veto and override veto and all that, and then it is his job to execute those laws. So the president can always choose not to, but the question is whether or not the president can remove an agency, and this is one of the things that's going to come up when the Department of Education gets removed and all this stuff. Can the president remove an agency or end an agency that Congress has set up? And right now, the answer is no. The president cannot overrule Congress and just completely null and void a law. That he can choose not to enforce the law and things like that through his powers, the chief executive, but Congress can then overrule him through impeachment. So that's very short lesson there. So after this executive, or after the injunction, the government issued a appeal. They appealed this to the Ninth Circuit, and the Ninth Circuit stayed the injunction in part. There's still parts of the injunction that they let happen. So what the Court of Appeals did, the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, which if anyone kind of pay attention, one of the big things that Trump did in his first term was there were a lot of federal judges he appointed that turned circuits like the Ninth Circuit purple. You know, prior to that, the Ninth Circuit was very blue, and there's a bunch of right-leaning federal judges in the Ninth Circuit now. So this is a good thing. So the Ninth Circuit stay basically allowed the government to pause most of the injunction that that Judge Whitehead had issued, except for refugees who were, quote, conditionally approved for resettlement prior to January 20th. They have to meet 3 criteria. They have to have approved applications, they have to be cleared for travel, and they have to have arranged travel plans. Near the end of March, Judge Whitehead ordered Secretary of State Marco Rubio to restore funding for refugee assistance groups, ruling that the termination of cooperative agreements violates congressional intent. This is another case where a judge has said congressional intent shows that that they want this, and Trump, acting as the chief executive, has decided not to do this. But the problem is that this is Congress's intent, and a judge, whether he's a district judge, a trial judge, a federal appellate judge, or a Supreme Court justice, their biggest job is to interpret Congress's or the Constitution's intent. And this judge interpreted Congress's intent as requiring congressional oversight for these groups. So after all of this, the government and the plaintiff's attorneys come back down to Judge Whitehead's office, and that judge basically says, government, y'all been told that you can limit the people that can come in to this criteria. You've chosen to limit it to this criteria. And part of the criteria was that you basically had to have had travel plans between, I believe it was the beginning of January and January 20th. That's really about a 3-week period. You have to have had travel plans ready to enter the United States and to get to your place of living. And that limited the group of refugees from 12,000 to 160. Today's order, what it does is it's Judge Whitehead saying you have limited it too specific. It's too small of a limit compared to what the Court of Appeals said. I am increasing that limit to include these 12,000. Now, these 12,000 were conditionally approved for resettlement before January 20th and had arranged travel plans regardless of the specific travel date. So basically, Whitehead's interpretation of the Court of Appeals decision is a broader interpretation than the government's interpretation. But it is still acting well within his bounds as a federal judge. This is not from what I can tell I'm not going to put in, 7 hours of reading and understanding what Whitehead's entire internal thoughts are. That is beyond what I can do for this channel right now. From what I can tell, and from my experience of reading federal orders and stuff like that, this is less of a defeat of Trump and a judge overstepping his bounds, and more of a judge just genuinely having a different interpretation of the court's ruling. Now, what's likely going to happen is the government's going to appeal this to the Court of Appeals, and the Court of Appeals, being a little more pro-red, they are not red by far, but they're slightly purple. I could definitely see the Court of Appeals deciding that Whitehead has gone too broad and bringing it back down a little bit. They probably don't, provide a list that says of the 12,000, you can actually only admit these 8,000. But they probably do, request an order basically saying, what's your criteria? How are you getting to these 12,000? and they'll probably go, okay, well, no, 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 yes, yes, no, no, yes. And then we'll end up with, 7,200, something like that. Like I said, I don't think this is some huge win for the left. It's not a defeat for the right. It's not a huge win for the right. It's not a defeat for the left. This is just the process taking hold. I think at the end of all of this, this executive order will be upheld. The Supreme Court has already ruled several times for the Trump administration, especially as early as today, where they upheld Donald Trump's ban of transgenders in the military. So the Supreme Court is not by far out of touch with what Trump wants. Even with what's her name being a real big disappointment. Everyone, thank you all so much. I hope you enjoy this. Apologize that this probably isn't as in-depth as we would all like, but unfortunately, I wanted to say something about this, but I'm just a little too busy at work right now. Guys, I look forward to tomorrow's video. I'm going to wake up early, work on that. We're going to get it done. It's going to be awesome. And then, of course, Thursday's live stream. I can't wait, guys. Peace out, and don't forget to follow me on Twitter at KingsAdvisors_.